I was sipping my morning coffee, half awake, when I saw the envelope. It was tucked under my welcome mat like a snake in the grass, neatly folded, bearing the ugly emblem of the Homeowners Association, a fine. Again, I hadn't even opened it, and I already knew what it was for. I could feel it in my gut. Sure enough, I pulled it out and read those familiar words in bold. Noise violation, continuous dog barking. Reported at 6:13 a.m. I looked over at my dog, Max, golden retriever, 13 years old, deaf in one ear, arthritis in both back legs. Max didn't even bark at squirrels anymore, just wagged his tail in slow motion. You're telling me this elderly fluffball is disturbing the peace at 6 a.m. I shook my head. Something was off. Then, it hit me. Karen. She lived, or so I thought, 3 houses down, mid-50s, bleach blonde bob, oversized sunglasses even when it rained. The kind of woman who walked like she owned the pavement. We'd had run-ins before. She once scolded me for painting my mailbox to navy, whatever that meant. Last fall, she reported me for leaving my trash bins out on a Sunday night, technically. Yes, but it was pouring rain and my back was out. She didn't care. But this was different. This was personal. She had walked by my yard 3 mornings in a row lately, glancing at Max and scribbling something in her little notebook. I should have said something, but I let it go. That was my mistake. See, I live in a neighborhood where the HOA thinks it's a government branch. They've got golf carts, plastic badges, and rules longer than the Constitution. But here's the kicker. They'll take any anonymous report and fine you without real proof. 3 strikes, and you're summoned to a hearing. This was my second strike. I wasn't about to let Max get me evicted. No way. The next morning I set an alarm for 5:30 a.m., brewed my strongest coffee and waited. Max was curled up on the porch, snoring like a small tractor. No barking, just old man dog dreams. Then I saw her. Karen. She strutted down the sidewalk, in her usual workout gear, neon pink top, clipboard in hand, earbuds in but not playing music. She paused in front of my house, looked at Max and pretended to flinch. Scribbled something. I got up and opened the screen door. Morning. I called out, loud enough to slice through her bubble. She startled, then gave me a forced smile. Oh, morning, working on your novel. I nodded toward the clipboard. She laughed nervously. Just documenting noise disturbances. Your dog was barking again today. I could hear it all the way from the tennis courts. That's when I knew something was wrong. The tennis courts, lady. They're on the other side of the neighborhood. You'd need a satellite dish to hear anything from here. Still, I smiled. Huh, that's odd. I've been sitting here since 5. Haven't heard a peep from Max. She didn't respond, just turned and walked off. Fast, I went inside and grabbed my tablet. It was time to set up cameras. By day 3 I had footage, not just of Max napping peacefully all morning, but of Karen walking by my property, looking straight at the camera and whispering to herself, "Gotcha." That was the moment I realized something bigger was going on, so I took a deeper dive. I logged into the HOA portal. I wanted to see who exactly had been reporting me. Anonymous, of course. But then I found something buried in the guidelines. All reports must be filed by verified residents in good standing. That one word stuck in my head, verified. So I did what any rational man would do. I pulled the public tax records. Karen's name, nowhere. I checked the address she supposedly lived at. The property was registered under a company name, some LLC based out of Florida. No tenant listing, no lease, registration with the HOA, no homeowner documents, no records at all. That's when I realized Karen didn't even live here. She was just squatting in her sister's house while it was supposedly being renovated. I'd heard rumors she was going through a divorce, and maybe this was her hideout. But legally, she had no right to file HOA reports, none, which meant every fine I got invalid. My jaw clenched. I wasn't just going to get my money back, I was going to expose her, but I had to be careful. HOA boards protect their frequent flyers like political allies. Karen had been a fixture around here for years. She volunteered for community events and handed out cookies at the clubhouse. To them, she was just a helpful neighbor. They had no idea she was faking her residency to play neighborhood cop, so I needed more than video. I needed the paper trail that weekend. I attended the HOA's monthly open meeting. I wore my best shirt, printed out the footage, and carried a manila folder like I was walking into court when I arrived. Karen was already there, front row, smiling like a queen on a throne. She saw me, and her face froze for just a second. Then the smile came back. Plastic empty. The board began discussing routine fines, trash bins, lawn height, fence painting. Then my name came up. Mr. Carter, the president said, 2 violations. For dog barking in the early morning hours, we'll need a response before escalating to hearing. I stood up actually. I said I have a few things to share. I handed out my printouts, time-stamped footage of Max sleeping, screenshots of audio logs, and finally, the public record showing Karen's lack of ownership or lease. The room went silent. Karen's face dropped. For the first time, I saw fear replace arrogance, but I wasn't finished. I'd also have documentation from the county that shows only verified residents may file actionable complaints. That's on page 3. Since Ms. Karen Williams isn't listed as a resident or tenant, All 3 of her recent complaints are invalid and I'd like my fines revoked. You could hear a pin drop. The president looked at Karen. Ms. Williams, do you have anything to say? She opened her mouth, closed it, then mumbled, I was just staying with my sister, but it was too late. The mask had fallen. After the meeting, Karen stormed out without a word. No clipboard, no smug glance, just the echo of her heels against the marble tile. I could almost hear her reputation crumbling under each step. The board stayed behind, flipping through my evidence, like it was a courtroom drama. They didn't say much, just promised to investigate further and pause all action regarding my case. I knew what that meant. They were covering their asses. But I wasn't done. That night I sat down with a glass of whiskey and thought about how deep this rabbit hole went. Because here's the thing, they didn't just fine me. They tarnished my record. If I ever wanted to rent, refinance, or sell, those violations would pop up like red flags on a credit report. And all because Karen decided my dog's quiet breathing was a threat to society. I opened my HOA's bylaws. Yes, I had downloaded the whole 88-page PDF months ago after they fined me for unauthorized flower color. Page 37. Persistent fraudulent reporting may result in permanent revocation of HOA privileges. There it was. I smiled. The next morning I got a knock at the door. It was Dave, my next-door neighbor. He was holding his own letter. Let me guess, I said, waving my still unopened envelope. Noise complaint. He nodded. Same timestamp as yours. But I was out of town that morning. We stood in silence for a beat. That's when it hit both of us. Karen wasn't just targeting me, she was filing bogus complaints on multiple neighbors. Dave had a pit bull named Luna, but she barely made a sound unless someone was breaking in. Across the street, Miss Cortez had gotten a notice last week for unauthorized landscaping because her granddaughter planted tulips. We realized something bigger was going on. Karen wasn't just being a nuisance. She was using the HOA system like a weapon, silencing people she didn't like, controlling who got fined, and probably trying to push people out of the neighborhood. But again, if she didn't even live here, why was she doing this? That question kept me up that night, so I started digging. I found Karen's sister on LinkedIn. Turns out, she's a high-level corporate lawyer traveling constantly, living overseas half the year. Her name was on the house. Karen nowhere. No mention in lease agreements, county records, or utilities.I. Also found a few old HOA newsletters on the neighborhood's website. You'd be surprised what people post when they think no one's reading. In the March edition, Karen was listed as a temporary community volunteer during her sister's long-term travel abroad, so technically she had been allowed to serve in a limited HOA capacity years ago, but that authorization expired 14 months ago. That was my new angle. Karen had no legal right to participate in HOA matters anymore. Not only had she faked reports, she had done so under expired authority, that she was impersonating a board-approved member. Now I had something more than petty complaints. I had impersonation and misrepresentation, so I did what any overprepared neighbor with a petty streak would do. I made a binder, labeled it Karen Dossier. Inside, dates, screenshots, cross-referenced, timestamps, video stills, HOA newsletters, public records, everything. I even printed out a map with pins marking every reported incident she had filed. A literal red flag map. That it was beautiful. The next HOA meeting was a closed session, but I requested time on the agenda as a concerned resident. They didn't want me to speak, but when I told them I'd bring Channel 7 and a lawyer, they found time. That night, I stood at the front of the community center, fluorescent lights buzzing above me. Karen sitting in the second row, again trying her best to look unbothered. I opened the binder and placed it on the table. This, I said, is the summary of violations committed not by residents, but by someone who has no legal standing in this community. Someone who has faked residency, impersonated board members, and cost innocent homeowners hundreds of dollars in false fines. Karen scoffed. You're obsessed. This is harassment. I didn't flinch. I turned to the board. Page 12. March 2022 newsletter. Her authorization expired last year. No renewal, no reassignment. Yet, she continued filing reports, including 14 noise complaints and 9 citations under HOA authority. The room was tense. The board president leaned forward. Is this accurate? Karen stood up. My sister owns the house. That gives me the right to act on her behalf. I smiled. Actually, that's not true. The bylaws are clear. Only owners and legal lessees have reporting privileges. I even confirmed with county zoning. Another board member, Linda, I think, spoke up. Ms. Williams, can you produce documentation that proves you have legal reporting status? Karen blinked. She looked around the room, then said, I'll have my sister send it. The board president raised a hand. Until then, we're suspending all your reporting privileges, effective immediately. Furthermore, we'll begin reviewing all complaints submitted under your name. Karen sat down. Slowly her face was pale. It was over. Well, not quite, because while Karen's reign of clipboard terror had ended, the neighborhood was still bruised. Dozens of us had paid fines, warnings had been sent out, and some residents had left entirely fed up with the HOA madness. So I proposed something radical. A new oversight committee, residents, not board members. 3 rotating homeowners who would independently review every complaint before a fine was issued. No more anonymous reporting. No more clipboard vigilantes. It passed unanimously. Later that week I got a letter in the mail. Not a fine this time, a refund check. $300 for the previous violations, plus a formal apology from the board. They called it a breakdown in oversight. I called it a win. Max. He didn't care. He just laid in the sun, tail thumping lazily against the porch boards, completely unaware that he'd been at the center of a quiet little neighborhood war. Sometimes justice doesn't bark, sometimes it just sits, waits, and brings the receipts. After the meeting, Karen disappeared for a few days. No more early morning power walks, no more notebook in hand, no more passive-aggressive stares from her porch. It was quiet, too quiet. Max noticed first. He'd usually bark once when she passed by in her clacking heels, just enough to get a glare thrown his way. But now, he didn't even lift his head from the cushion by the front window. I thought maybe she was just regrouping, planning her next petty move. But as it turns out, the storm wasn't over. It was just changing direction. It started with Dave again. He called me one evening with that half-suspicious, half-exhausted voice that people use when they think they've stumbled into something illegal but aren't sure yet. Dude, he said, remember how I told you I saw Karen looking at that house 2 streets over a few weeks back? Yeah, what about it? Well, she's been staying there, at least 3 nights a week. That wasn't totally weird until he mentioned the kicker: that place. It's a short-term rental. I looked it up. She doesn't even rent it herself. It's her friend's Airbnb. So not only had Karen been acting like a resident, she had no legal tie to any property in the entire community. Anymore, she had been trespassing through the HOA's enforcement system using an expired title and a borrowed address. And the best part, the HOA bylaws had a name for this exact situation: the Karma Clause. Okay, that's not what it's officially called. It's actually titled Section 12.1, Fraudulent Residency and Unauthorized Enforcement. But what it means is simple. Any individual falsely representing residency for the purpose of reporting or enforcing HOA policy shall be liable for damages incurred by the community, including legal action and restitution of wrongly levied fines. Yes, they could sue her that weekend. I invited a few of the neighbors over. Dave, Miss Cortez, the guy with the motorcycle she hated. We weren't hosting a block party. We were forming a coalition. We met on my patio with iced tea and a single goal: hold Karen accountable. Together, we pooled what we knew. Cortez had 2 warnings from Karen in the last 6 months. Dave had 4. The biker dude, his name's Marcus, had been cited 7 times for engine idling and garage clutter. One of those times, his bike wasn't even there. He'd left it at the shop for repairs. All of it traced back to Karen. We compiled it all into a packet, not a binder this time. This time, it needed to go legal. So we did the next logical thing. We hired a lawyer. It took less than a week for the Cesandesis letter to be sent. Certified mail. Signature required. The letter outlined Karen's lack of official HOA, standing her misuse of expired authority, the false claims she submitted, and a demand for restitution for each resident affected. We weren't suing it, but the message was loud and clear. She'd messed with the wrong neighborhood. Then came the twist. Karen showed up at my door. It was a Thursday morning. She wasn't wearing her usual neighborhood enforcement outfit. No clipboard, no blazer, just jeans, sunglasses, and a hoodie. I need to talk, she said, eyes hidden behind reflective lenses. I wasn't about to let her inside, but I stepped onto the porch. Make it quick, I said, and then she dropped it. I wasn't trying to be malicious. I laughed. She continued. When my sister left, she told me to watch the house. That's all. But then I started noticing things: people leaving trash cans out, kids running around without supervision, barking dogs, messy yards. Nobody seemed to care. She took a breath. So I took care of it. I just stared at her. You impersonated a board member. You reported people for stuff that didn't even happen. You got neighbors fined over noise that came from the mail truck. Karen. She flinched. It wasn't personal, she said quietly. But it was. It always was. You don't even live here. She nodded slowly. I know. I just wanted it to feel like home. For a second, I saw the loneliness behind all that. Control. But it didn't change anything. She'd cost people money, peace of mind, and for some, their homes. And just like that, she turned around and left. No apology, no promise to stop. Just gone. 2 days later, her sister called the HOA directly. They've been made aware of Karen's behavior, and she was furious. Said Karen had overstayed her welcome, abused her name, and misused access to private documents. According to the board, she was deeply apologetic. She even offered to pay back the community from her own pocket, but it wasn't enough. At the next HOA board meeting, they passed a new rule: the Karen Clause. Again, unofficial name, but this one had teeth. All complaints must be signed by verified residents. Fines would be delayed pending confirmation of facts. Repeat false accusers would face permanent reporting bans, and any impersonation would result in immediate legal escalation. A week after that, the community got a letter confirming that all citations linked to Karen had been formally expunged. Every single one, even the tulip fine. The neighborhood changed after that. People smiled more, talked to each other more. Someone even started a weekend dog walking club. Max became the unofficial mascot, trotting beside the group like a celebrity bodyguard with a wagging tail. Karen, she moved out of town. Last I heard, she was staying with a cousin in another gated community. Poor cousin, but that wasn't my problem anymore, because justice sometimes it doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from a community saying, not this time. They say when a storm passes, the air feels different. That's exactly what it felt like after Karen left. Not just quieter, lighter. The tension in the neighborhood had finally cracked like a brittle sidewalk under too much pressure, and something fresh was pushing through the cracks. People who used to keep to themselves were suddenly waving again. Conversations popped up at mailboxes. Kids chalked driveways without a clipboard scolding their color choices. For the first time in years, it felt like a neighborhood again, not a watch list. But just because Karen was gone didn't mean things went back to the way they were. Some things changed forever. A week after the board cleared everyone's fines, I saw Marcus the biker guy power washing his driveway with music blaring. He had a beer in hand, his dog running in circles chasing the spray, and not a care in the world. Enjoying your freedom, I shouted from across the street like it's Independence Day. He laughed, we all were. Even Ms. Cortez, who used to peek through her blinds like a sentry guarding a castle, had softened. She was on her porch that afternoon, knitting with earbuds in, and Max sitting next to her like her personal protector. He liked her now. She gave him biscuits. I asked her once why she never said anything during the whole Karen saga. She shrugged. I didn't want to make it worse. But when you stood up, we all realized we could have done that sooner. That hit me, because it wasn't just Karen. That was the problem. It was fear, silence, the way a community can fall apart without a single raised voice. I started walking Max more often, not just for exercise but for presence. We became the unofficial patrol team. People would stop us and say, hey, tell Max we're good now, or does Max approve of my loan length? Joking, mostly, but not completely. Max had become a symbol. The dog Karen tried to silence, the dog that never even barked, and now the dog everyone loved. But there was one more thing to settle. I didn't want to just patch over what happened. I wanted to build something better, so I called for a community meeting. Not a formal HOA meeting with motions and minutes. Just a gathering, a chance to talk about how we wanted to live here together. 2:30-4 people showed up. We met at the community park under the big oak tree near the tennis courts. Folding chairs, lemonade, kids playing tag in the background, no clipboards in sight. I opened with a simple question. What kind of neighborhood do we want to be? The answers came slow at first. Friendly, safe, less controlling, more human. Someone suggested a community garden. Another proposed a dog of the month bulletin board. Ms. Cortez offered to teach knitting classes on Saturdays. Even Dave, usually the quiet one, volunteered to start a neighborhood newsletter. We weren't just undoing Karen's damage. We were reclaiming our neighborhood. The board showed up 2-3 of the 5 members. They listened, took notes, nodded at every suggestion. At the end, the chairperson stood and said, we failed you before. Let's not fail each other again. And for once, nobody rolled their eyes. A few days later, something wild happened. The HOA voted to rewrite the complaint policy. Instead of allowing anonymous or unverifiable complaints, they created a public portal. Residents could submit concerns, but they had to attach their name, address, and provide evidence. And before any fine was issued, the accused neighbor had a right to a real conversation first. Simple, human. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And the cherry on top, Karen's name was permanently flagged in the system. No complaint from her could ever be processed again. One evening, Max and I were sitting on the porch. It was quiet, the good kind of quiet. Sunset lit the neighborhood in that golden hue where everything looks like it belongs in a postcard. Then I noticed a woman walking by. New face, maybe mid-30s. She had a small corgi trotting next to her and a confused look on her face. You just move in, I called. She looked relieved. Someone spoke to her. Yeah, yesterday. House on Birch and Magnolia. Welcome to the neighborhood. She smiled. Thanks. It's nice so far, just a little tense. Like people are watching to see what I do. I laughed. Old habit. We had a situation. Oh, I pointed to Max. This guy got reported by someone who didn't even live here. Set off a whole revolution. She knelt down to pet him. Well, you're adorable. I'd vouch for you. Max gave one happy bark. You'll fit right in, I said. That night I realized something important. Gagrin may have been the villain of our story, but she also gave us something valuable. She shook us up, forced us to open our eyes, made us confront the systems we allowed to rule us by fear and silence. Because when people band together, not in complaint, but in community, they can do more than survive. They can transform now. The neighborhood has a new rhythm, a new culture, and every time I walk past a house where someone waves, or see kids drawing on sidewalks without getting scolded, I think about that first knock on my door, the one that started it all. Max was just being a dog and Karen, she was just the match. But we were the spark. there's a strange comfort in watching a place grow. Not just watching it exist or operate, but truly change because of something you were part of. Something small at first, like a spark in dry grass. Then suddenly it's warmth, then light, then community. All because of one woman with too much time, and one dog who never stopped being himself. 6 months after Karen's exit, the neighborhood barely resembled the one she tried to control. The HOA board was still around, but now they focused more on listening than policing. The monthly newsletter, Dave actually followed through, was filled with dog photos, recipes from Ms. Cortez, and a running joke about Max's bark approval rating, which stayed at a steady 100%. And as for Max, he became a legend. One morning, I woke up to find someone had painted a small mural on the brick wall near the entrance of the neighborhood. It was him, tongue out, tail mid-wag, staring off like a general surveying his troops. Underneath, in neat white letters, "Let dogs bark, let neighbors live." No one claimed it, but no one erased it either. In a weird way, it felt like a monument, not to Max alone, but to what we'd all been through. The nonsense, the fines, the fear, and the freedom that came after. But what surprised me the most was what it did to me. See, before all this, I was just a guy trying to keep his head down, pay his mortgage, walk his dog, wave when waved to, never stir the pot. But the Karen ordeal taught me something I didn't expect to learn at this age. Silence can be compliance. When I let Karen push me around, I wasn't just protecting my piece, I was handing her power. And if nobody ever stands up to that kind of energy, it spreads. The clipboards, the whispers, the fake authority. It all thrives in silence. So now I speak up when a new neighbor moves in. I welcome them. When someone gets a letter they don't understand, I help them navigate it. When the HOA posts something unclear, I ask questions. I've become that guy, the one people come to when they need help dealing with HOA stuff. Not because I love rules, but because I learned how to fight fair. A year later, I got a letter in the mail. This time, not a complaint, not a fine. It was from Karen, Karen, handwritten, no return address. Just a short note. I didn't realize how much I'd lost until I left. I thought I was making the neighborhood better. Turns out, I just didn't know how to feel at home anymore. I hope Max as well. U2K. I read it twice. Then, I put it in a drawer, next to the expunged violation letter and the first picture we printed of Max in the community newsletter. I didn't hate her anymore. She'd been broken in her own way, trying to control a world she felt left out of. But now we'd all moved on, grew up, grew together. One summer evening during the neighborhood's first ever Dogs and Donuts event, that's real, I stood by the park gazebo with Max, as kids ran circles around him, feeding him bits of donut holes and laughing like life had never been difficult. Marcus played music from his speaker. Ms. Cortez taught a boy how to knit a leash. Dave passed out mini flyers for the upcoming block party. And me, I just stood there with my dog, watching the kind of neighborhood I always wanted to live in and realizing I was already in it, not because of rules, not because of Karen, but because a bunch of normal people finally said, this is our street, our lives, our story. And if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's this: sometimes your enemy shows up in a blazer with a clipboard, sometimes justice looks like a community potluck, and sometimes the hero wears a leash. Now, every time I hear Max bark, whether it's at a squirrel, a mail truck, or just for Fune's smile, because in this neighborhood, that bark is freedom.